Welcome to the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where, like Jason Kelce, our tits are not out this week. I am Brendan Clean, a staff writer at Awful Announcing. That is Ben Axelrod, a senior editor at Awful Announcing. We've got Shannon Sharpe reminding us he's the biggest star in sports media. That's my opinion. We'll see how Ben feels. The Athletic moves further away from being the Athletic, and Congress might finally be doing something about sports betting. It's week 2 of the NFL season. Sports media, as always, giving us a ton to talk about. Ben, how are you today?
I'm doing good. This is episode 4 for us. I believe that puts this in the running for my longest running podcast. So you and
Oh,
I
nice.
are now forever linked. But yeah, doing great.
We should have worn some party hats or something to
Yeah.
celebrate the occasion. I have a podcast that is hopefully one day going to be much smaller than this one that I've been doing for 7 years. So we got a long way to go
Wow.
on that, but we'll get there. I have faith. All right. So the big story, I think, in sports media within the past week since we last recorded is Shannon Sharpe, as it often is. But what was not usual about this one is that it included us hearing the man having sex. Not something I thought we would necessarily be talking about. He accidentally went live on Instagram. Videos immediately leaked. But what I think was maybe the most interesting part of this for us to talk about, Ben, is how savvy his response to it was, in my opinion. Live apology episode of Nightcap the night of. Brought on everybody from Snoop Dogg to Kai Cenat, the Twitch streamer, the next day for a roast of Shannon Sharpe, just making fun of him, ethering him with jokes about how old he is and silly he is and whatever. And now they're selling merch. To me, it was just a reminder that this dude is at the top of his game and he can make something that other people might frankly have gotten fired for into a week of like the most views and attention he might get all of 2024. I guess post Cat Williams.
Well, so that was the overall response from Shannon Sharpe. The immediate response was to post on his story that he had been hacked, which if you're going to claim you got hacked, like you have to at least wait 10 minutes, 15 minutes, like probably an hour. But like you can't get hacked and then immediately let everybody know you got hacked. Like that's not how hacking works. Like these must have been the most benevolent hackers ever to hack in there, upload your sex tape, and then immediately give it back to you so you can let everybody know what happened. But to your overall,
him, he did say that was an assistant, right?
Yeah.
Who tried to help him out. And Shannon, if we go with his story, says he very quickly told that assistant to stand down and he owned the mistake. But it was a funny one.
So the overall explanation, right, is just that he accidentally went live, like he was having sex and somehow in the midst of passion, like decided to go through the 4 steps on Instagram required to go live.
That is what he is asking us to believe. Yeah, he said that he literally said, I don't even know how to do it, but I was on Instagram. I didn't like close my phone properly. I just threw it down and somehow I clicked all the things that allow you to get into Instagram Live and started going at it and the world heard me.
So that would be though my, I guess, pushback on his response is that if you wanted to make a case that this was not accidental, that this was something done to get attention, like the response is very much leaning into the attention aspect of this, right? And I think it's a delicate balance of he has to lean into it. He has to acknowledge it. He has to, I thought like, doing the emergency episode was a no-brainer and a great call on his part. Selling the merch though, that's a little bit of a step too far. I'm not sure Shannon Sharpe, knowing what he's been paid over the course of his NFL career, let alone what he's now being paid in his media career. I'm not sure he needs to profit off of this per se, but I do think it was smart to lean into it.
Considering he said that he made quite a ways into the 7 figures off of the Cat Williams interview alone, I don't know if he needs $50 a pop on some shirts. I would agree with you on that. I also, did this woman give her consent for her name to be on these shirts? I mean, I hope so. I'm not trying to accuse, but like personally, just to get some jokes off, having all these Nightcap fans walking around with my name on their body because of a incident that I did not a mistake that I did not make would be a little awkward. But Yeah, it is a little bit far fetched, but also the man is almost 60 years old, and I do
Right.
believe that he could have just screwed up. We've all been around people who you come across a relative in your family or somebody. How did you do this? How did your phone do what you're showing me it did, and now need help to solve? So, okay, I can buy it a little bit, but
Yeah, I'm 35 and I like once a day I turn on the flashlight on my phone and I have no
yep,
idea how. I'm just walking in public and like somebody at Walgreens will be like, "Hey, your flashlight's on," and I'll be totally oblivious. So I think that was actually because there was this natural comparison to Paul Pierce, right? Because Paul Pierce did something on Instagram Live that was sexual in nature, but the difference was like as far as we know, Paul Pierce was like intentionally going live, right? And
he's
and
talking
this
to the camera. Yeah.
Right. And this very much seemed to be um an invasion of privacy, granted self-inflicted, but this was not something that, as far as we know, Shannon Sharpe was trying to broadcast to the world. So I thought like the immediate response was, "Oh my God, is Shannon Sharpe going to lose his job?" I never thought Shannon Sharpe was going to get punished, let alone lose his job. When you consider the nature of the quote unquote offense.
I didn't really either. I You didn't see him. I wonder if the reaction, how different it would have been if there was a visual in all of this. That would have been obviously a whole other layer of a conversation that probably would have taken like the visuals of it far past what Paul Pierce was up to. Also, Paul Pierce was, you know, with some women. He was doing drugs, like whatever he was doing, even if it's just tobacco. Like it had a way worse optics than anything here. But the other thing is, in terms of just riding that comparison out, Paul Pierce, in hindsight, and even some of the reporting right in the aftermath of that, which was several years ago now, when he was fired from ESPN, was he was on his way. He was on the outs there.
Mhm.
He wasn't exactly a top personality. But Shannon Sharpe absolutely is, which is another reason I had no belief that Colin Cowherd's going to cut off the volume partnership or First Take's going to say goodbye to him and he's gone forever. He's huge. And I think this actually humanized him. If there's anything you could say about Shannon Sharpe, he's silly. He's not afraid to like tell funny stories about his personal life. He obviously is very opinionated about sports and entertaining, and he's a great host. He kind of knows the business, obviously, having been in it for like 20 years now. But he's very private. He is a very private guy. We don't know a lot about Shannon Sharpe. If anything, I think that this probably had his fans being like, "Wow, I didn't know Unk was like that." You know what I mean? And
It
like,
definitely had me saying, "Wow."
yeah, like I don't know. I think there will in a while, maybe when the embarrassment fades and he stops milking it for content, we might look at it and be like, it was a positive long term. He not just for the attention, but for the way the attention happened, where people got an actual insight into this dude's life, even if it was a humiliating mistake. It's also like, oh, okay, he's a real person.
Yeah, it humanizes him a little bit because he is so confident and so boisterous and so outgoing that this like he's never going to lose a debate even if he's on the wrong side of a debate. Like he's the way he presents himself is so confident, but this does like it's some humiliation. It gives him some humility and something that they can joke about. There was actually a moment on First Take on Monday where I think he was off camera and Molly Karam was doing a read and he was still talking and he was still mic'd up. And Molly said, "Shannon, we can still hear you." And I don't know who did it from us. I think it might have been Brandon Contest, but they tweeted the clip and said, "Hearing somebody say, 'Shannon, we can hear you,' hits a little bit different now." And it's going to be this thing now. It's
It's
we've
never
heard
going away.
yeah, we've heard Shannon Sharpe have sex now. So
Yeah.
that is now part of his backstory as much as the Denver Broncos and Baltimore Ravens are.
So I'm doing a project for us with some of our editors at Awful Announcing on basically our version of something the Hollywood Reporter has done for a few years, which is like their podcast power list. People in podcasting writ large, and obviously that runs from politics to Joe Rogan to everything else. We're going to do a sports version. And I don't know if we're going to rank it, but just the whole exercise has gotten me thinking. It's not really related to this exact story, but while we're on the topic of Shannon Sharpe, is he the top of the most impactful, most important, most prevalent personality in our little world? he's on the one hand of people you're counting off if he's not at the top.
He's in the conversation for sure, especially when you have, I think the thing he has really working in his favor is you have the direct comparison of the ratings at Fox when he was on Fox and the ratings at ESPN when he moved to ESPN. And that is like, he is an established draw. Like, he left Fox and Undisputed ceased to exist after a year. And he's at ESPN and First Take is as strong as it's ever been. I think I would put Stephen A. Smith ahead of him, mainly because I do think there's something with Shannon Sharpe as a former NFL player that almost works against him, because I think to the average sports fan, they might just think of Shannon Sharpe as player X who turned into a sports media personality, and they don't necessarily know him from Ryan Clark, from Charles Barkley. Those are some pretty extreme comparisons, but like, I think like, there are average sports fans who just view him as next player. When people like you and I who watch this stuff every day, we know he's obviously so much more than that. I mean, even like First Take keeps him on for his NBA coverage, but he's on the list. I think it's probably Stephen A. Smith, Pat McAfee, and him like are the top three.
Yeah, I almost, measure it in a way by when you talk to people in your life who don't know anything about this, who do they know? And when I got this job and was telling some like extended family about it, they mentioned
that's always fun.
Yeah, exactly. They mentioned Stephen A. Smith, and then Shannon came up next. And yes, the ratings and the viewership for his network shows are one thing, but Nightcap has been around for a year, and it's one of the biggest shows on YouTube already. Like, there's this website, Social Blade, where you can look at YouTube metrics, and it's all estimated. It's all proprietary information. But this website shows that it is estimated that they make as much as $1.6 million off of this show in kind of projecting out a year from now, but it continues to grow. So I would imagine that's even higher. They get millions of views a day on this thing. They go live for like 2-3 hours, like 4 times a week. He's just so front and center. I think that we're going to be, it's safe to say we're going to be talking plenty more about Shannon Sharpe, but I think again, this might only kind of propel him in terms of relating to younger people and kind of the personality driven stuff that he's doing outside of FS1 and ESPN. But let's get into some more business conversation here in the sports media world, and that relates to The Athletic, which it's this time of year, right, Ben? It's September, October. We're getting the personnel changes. We've had the Ringer lose people. We've had The Athletic lose some people. Guys get hired elsewhere and everything else. And The Athletic has done a lot more losing than gaining, it feels like, especially when it comes to the local side of things, which was the original mission of the whole thing. And Tim Kawakami and David Lombardi, who were founding parts of their Bay Area outlet once upon a time, which used to be where the company was headquartered. They left for the venture capital funded San Francisco Standard this week or last week. Fred Katz, longtime Knicks beat writer. He's covered like 3 or 4 teams across the NBA world for a very long time. He's a national NBA guy for them now. They moved their Pistons writer, James Edwards, to the Knicks beat. And, we covered this on Awful Announcing a while ago, but just to throw in Mark Kaboli, now of the Pat McAfee show, covering whatever it is they have him covering. Actually, I haven't seen him on that show since all that happened personally, so I don't know what the deal is. He used to cover the Steelers, also worked for The Athletic since it basically started in Pittsburgh, and he has been laid off. I'm sure there's more I'm missing, and they have, I'm sure, hired some other folks, but it just feels like week after week we are covering people who have worked for this site and covered local teams there for close to a decade, leaving for one job or another. What's your reaction to the gradual evolution of this website from what they told us it was going to be to what it is now?
It's really, really fascinating to me. This is probably like, I think one of the more undercovered entities in the sports business world. I think that, when The Athletic started, it was, we are going to be revolutionary. We are going to bleed the local newspapers dry. We're going to put everything behind a paywall, but what you are buying behind this paywall is worth it. Like, this is the premium sports coverage that you are going to find. We're going to get the best beat writer in every city. We're going to get the top national insiders. I think by and large, the Athletic largely lived up to that expectation. Now, the problem is they weren't making money when they were doing it. And that to me was always the issue with the Athletic was, okay, you guys are clearly investing a shitload of money. You're sending beat writers to every away game. You're going to every media day. You are pouring a lot of money in this. What happens now when you sell this thing and whoever buys it has to face the same realities that every other sports media outlet in the world has had to face? And that's exactly what happened. They sold it to the New York Times, and the New York Times is they are actively trying to make a profit on this thing. And for whatever reason, the metrics clearly tell them that to do that, they need to take a national approach and to forego the local approach they were taking. I mean, there are several local beats, high profile local beats without beat writers right now. I mean, I can just speak from my personal experience. The Cleveland Cavaliers are a perennial playoff team in the NBA. They haven't had a full-time beat writer in over a year at this point. You go to the Athletics Cavs page, the most recent story is a month-old story about a LeBron James high school jersey selling at auction. Their most recent Cavs story that was written by a writer focused on the Cavs was from 2 months ago. Like they are actively not covering the Cleveland Cavaliers. I know they don't I was stunned. You said they don't have a Phoenix Suns writer?
They have one person in the state of Arizona employed by the Athletic, and he is basically treated like an AP wire guy, just going to whatever the biggest thing in the given day or week might be. He's been doing that since 2020 when they laid off everybody and they cut their staff by like a quarter back then, pre New York Times acquisition. They did a bunch of layoffs like a lot of companies, every kind of company did because of COVID. And they basically never really course corrected after that to replenish a lot of those places. I mean, there was a while where in the NBA, the Suns didn't have a writer when they made the finals. The Miami Heat haven't had a writer since 2020. They made the finals in 2023. I'm not sure what the situation is with the Denver Nuggets. I know Denver's been a little hit or miss for them as they've rearranged. The NFL, like every media company, is mostly well covered. I'm sure there's a Browns writer. Our Arizona guy mostly ends up at Cardinals things. But I mean, I don't know. I hate to like be so reductive with a conversation like this. A bunch of VC dudes started this website, and the scale of local coverage was never going to make enough money for them to feel good about it.
Right.
It
It's
just,
I mean, it's a classic
sad, but
VC
like, what
story.
are you going to do, right?
Right. But so I guess that's what's interesting is, I mean, the Athletic started in 2016. I think it really gained steam in 2017. And like, is this just going to be it? Like, I know it will still exist. And I know, like, clearly they're making investments elsewhere. They're bringing in like high profile insiders like Diana Rossini. And they had Shams, but we'll all remember like this golden era of the Athletic where they were like the place to go for local coverage. And like, this is it. Like, it's just going to be this like flash in the pan. And now they're just going to be another national outlet competing with ESPN and Fox.
Well, and the sad thing is, right, that their initial like the problem, the opening in the marketplace, the disruption that they wanted to do was accurate. There was a dearth of local coverage. There were newspapers, whether they were ever going to bleed them dry. No, like Facebook and Google were bleeding newspapers dry, and the Athletic just basically swooped in to try to fix that dying breed of writer and business model. I'm not really sure if the Athletic fast forwarded that, or we can have that debate maybe a different time. Point is, that problem still exists. Nobody, when my Athletic Suns and Cardinals writers left, nobody replaced them. There's just one fewer. You know what I mean? And so it's a golden age of the Athletic. Yes, it's also for a lot of people, a lot of cities where they actually were doing that service. It was a golden age of like being a fan of that team and having information.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to say that there's so much content creation. There's YouTubers and TikTokers and people. Maybe it's just an evolution that was bound to happen anyway, but people have less information on the ground in person about their team as a result of this. There's almost no way around that fact.
Yeah. And I mean, when the Athletic launched, like, it was easy to like, roll your eyes at the, why I'm joining the Athletic. And like every time, your local your local beat writer at the newspaper announced he was leaving and he was getting a new job. Like everybody could guess where he was heading.
Yeah.
And it was great though for the industry because it was creating new jobs. And then, they'd leave the paper and the paper would have to hire somebody else. It was just a big outlet that was employing a lot of sports writers. And now they're just employing less sports writers. Like now it used to be, I'm guessing we were covering a lot of why I'm joining the Athletic letters back in 2017 and 2018. And now we're covering a lot of why I'm leaving the Athletic letters in 2024. It's just, I always knew they would reach this point because like, there's a reason why other outlets and newspapers and online websites were shifting to the models they were shifting to because the old way wasn't cutting it. And now like the Athletic was always going to reach this point. It's just, it's crazy to me that it's lasted less than a decade even.
Yeah. I do want to let's just, be somewhat optimistic for a moment because I've covered and been kind of nerding out for a while now on there are business models at an exponentially smaller scale that are replacing some of this, right? Like Boston Sports Journal, DK Pittsburgh, All
DNVR.
City.
Yep.
Yeah, All City. They've done a lot more on, hey, let's transport what people like about sports coverage, but make it digital and omnipresent in their lives through social and YouTube and everything. And so that gives me a little bit of hope that people are rethinking it in a way that's more sustainable. And I don't want to make it that like, again, even just random people we cover sometimes like the Pittsburgh or the Las Vegas Raiders reporter who got caught on a hot mic saying that Gardner Minshew was going to get his ass beat by the Ravens. It was like a dumb little thing we covered last week. That was unearthed by some random dude who has like a huge Raiders TikTok or Instagram account. And so like you come across all these things and you're like, oh, that's probably how people are getting a lot of their Raiders coverage. It's just different now. But there's also some of these places that are doing real journalism and that should be lauded and covered so that, there's more opportunity for it in the future. But you mentioned why I'm leaving the Athletic. The part of it that might even be more pertinent rather than us just like wishing it was different or that they had stayed true to their North Star is they're not even retaining and building a brand around national people.
Yeah.
Like they made so much and rightly so. Like you mentioned the insiders, and those people will probably stick around. And Diana Rossini's podcast got a lot of attention. We talked about it our first episode. But, I'm looking through our archives here. Ari Wasserman and Max Olson, Kalen Kaler, Nicole Auerbach. That's just 4 off the first page of this that I can find of people who have left, and I'm sure they've been replaced or whatever, but Shams Charania is a free agent. I would expect he probably stays there for a portion of what he does, just to have a place to break news and write. But it's not as if they've moved off of this localized model to we have the best national people. You can't even say that because they're not keeping them, and ESPN probably still has them beat on the top of the top people in every sport.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I just think I thought the moving Fred Katz from the Knicks to the NBA beat, and then moving James Edwards from the Pistons to the Knicks. I thought that was like indicative of all of like whatever shift in strategy they're doing. Like you could point to that move and that will tell you what it is, because like Fred Katz, great writer, great beat reporter, but the Athletic has a lot of national writers already. Like I didn't see them having a void of national writers. And then James, obviously, the Knicks are a more prominent beat than the Pistons. So you move the Pistons writer to the Knicks, and they promise they're going to fill the Knicks, the Pistons beat. I'm really skeptical they're going to fill that Pistons beat. If they're not covering the Cavs, who are a perennial playoff team, like why would they cover the Pistons? Like I just don't. Yep. So it is this shift to clearly a more national approach. But I also think like, look, national writers exist for a reason, but there's stuff like that they cannot cover that local beat writers have an innate understanding of when it comes to both the teams and the fan bases and the connections that they've built. And I don't know about this idea of just like having all these, promoting all these previous local writers to national positions and then thinking that's how you're going to cover the league at large. I think we already have a lot of outlets that do that.
Yeah, similar thing. Chris Kirshner used to cover the Atlanta Hawks for them. He covers the Yankees now, and they never filled him.
Yeah.
They never backfilled it. They've done this a lot, and yeah, it's the other part of it, and this is just kind of on a soapbox a little bit now, but the hiring of like columnists and kind of like opinion people, or even some of the podcast investment that they've fluctuated on, are they, aren't they, with podcasting? That's just a waste, in my opinion. A columnist in 2024, the amount of money that it costs to bring those people in, it's not to say that nobody can do impactful opinion writing. But again, it's if you have 6 of those who are probably making a lot of money knowing the names of some of the people versus nobody covering all these teams, it's just for what? It does feel like they're just falling into a lot of the traps of the prestige, and the New York Times needs to mean something, so we have to have the best of the best. And I don't know. It bums me out more than anything. And I would honestly say I find myself reading them less than I used to.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And that's, I mean, they after the Cavs got eliminated from the playoffs, they dropped this, like they call it on the Press Box podcast, they call it the now they tell us piece. Like when somebody leaves or a coach gets fired or a season ends disastrously.
Everybody wanted Jared Allen to play with the broken rib, right?
Exactly. And so they dropped this huge, like basically everything anybody who's been bitching about the Cavs all season, like me, they like drop a piece telling you exactly what's happening behind the scenes. And that used to be happening like on a weekly or at least semi-regular basis. And now it just seems like less and less. And I also think another thing that's stood out to me is the shift to the New York Times branding. Like at this point, why not just absorb them and become the New York Times? Like if that's what it's going to be
eventually, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's probably the end game to all of this, which again,
they want their sports Maggie Haberman. Basically, like that's kind of what it is here. They're not they don't have there's nobody covering Arizona politics for the New York Times. So why do they need somebody to cover Arizona sports?
Exactly. It's just, like I said, I knew this was inevitable. They would reach this fork in the road. I'm surprised how quickly it came.
All right. Last but not least, sports betting. You covered this for us, Ben. New bill introduced in Congress this week from the Democrat representatives Paul Tonko and Richard Blumenthal. It is called the Supporting Affordability and Fairness with Every Bet Act, the Safe Bet Act, in other words. The thing that stuck out to me on this, rather than getting bogged down in like reading the bill or anything, we'll have a bigger conversation here. But I think that the limiting of advertising during live sporting events to suggest kind of these put 5 down and get this, or free $200 in bets if you put 100 into your account, and those types of things being reduced or exterminated, and then limiting the number of deposits that people can make, which kind of goes hand in hand, right? It's basically just limitations, regulations, restrictions, rather than just all out pushing people to bet the most volume, the most money, everything all the time. One, how realistic do you think this is? And two, I guess a similar question to what we were talking about just now with The Athletic. This happened real fast, from legal to, whoa, we got to get our arms around this.
Yeah, I'd actually argue I'm surprised how long it took, because the Supreme Court struck down the national ban on gambling in 2018. And so states have been periodically, increasingly be legalizing sports betting. I think we're at 38 states now, plus Washington, D.C., that have legalized sports betting. And it was only a matter of time, like before we reached this point where they were going to have to step in with some sort of federal regulations. Like I can't believe this wasn't a larger conversation earlier. And maybe we've just reached that tipping point now that we're at like, almost 40 states that have it. But I thought it was interesting. The bill focused on 3 specific areas. It was advertising, affordability, and AI, which I understand. Advertising and affordability, I think those are kind of no-brainers. The AI stuff scares the shit out of me, in terms of like how they're tracking your betting and how they use that to promote specific bets to you. I say scares the shit out of me in terms of like this is stuff I didn't even know I'm just naive. I didn't know they were using AI for, but so I certainly think it makes sense to get their arms wrapped around that. But this isn't anything that's going away. I think we'll reach the point where like all 50 states have it legalized. And I think, when you consider how much it varies from state to state, what you can bet on, and even like having online casinos in different states, like it makes sense to have at least some sort of minimum federal standard that each state has to adhere to before this becomes like a public health crisis.
I think we're there
Yeah.
personally. I think it is. Yeah. And it, not to be so cynical, but it doesn't surprise me that our particular government would be a little late to the party here on doing something about it. They tend to be, a bunch of 60-year-olds who don't know what anything is ever happening. And then it's, oh wow, my kid went to rehab. I gotta do something about this. But I've actually the AI thing just as a slight, left turn. I randomly got assigned a feature story for a USA Today magazine about AI and sports gambling last year, just through a person that I knew, and got to talk to a lot of people who are in that world. I think the point you make about the way that it can be used for advertising and marketing is really insidious and weird. The way that AI is primarily being used in sports betting right now is the most like convoluted thing that just makes you want to like shut it all down, because it is basically both sides using machine learning to make bets that are impossible to win and then try to win them, all in like in the moment live betting, especially because that's a frontier that humans can't create fast enough.
Yeah.
And it's just like the thing that I think we can maybe jump to on this, that I think underpins why the marketing of it is so problematic, and maybe what's being hidden from people, that I personally would be focused on if I was, one of the people in Congress, that Haral Bob Vulgaris brought up on Twitter that he's been big on for a while. Kind of maybe the wrong messenger, maybe,
Yeah.
given that he made his fortune on this, but still reasonable, is that they're not clear with people in these ads, even in some sort of Surgeon General's warning type of way, that if you're very good, you will not get to bet anymore.
Yeah. It's
It's not built for you to win ever. And if you do win, you don't get to do it. And that does not get ever communicated. And I think the average person, especially young people, are really being misled with that side of it.
Yeah, I think the education on all of it has been very lacking, especially, being upfront about stuff like that, which they're never going to be upfront about. So at least if you make them comply to some sort of minimum federal standard, at least you can, you're never going to get to that point. They'll never allow that, but you can at least, inch it toward that direction. I gamble. Like I'm
Mhm.
not precious about this. Like I bet
Sure.
on a fairly regular basis, but like I think they need to just like have flashing screens that say this is not a second form of income. This will never be a second form of income for you. The game, to your point, is rigged. Like the if you take the books, you're going to get one big payday and they're never going to let you bet again. And if they find that you're using, a prop service that's touting picks and you have to get in there before the bets close, they will limit your account and they will limit how much you're allowed to bet. Like it is a nasty business. And like you said, it kind of goes both ways. So I think actually somebody like Haralabob, who he probably has the most credibility when it comes to these conversations, because you would think he's somebody who wants a free for all in the market and wants the ability, to bet on whatever, whenever, for however much money. And if somebody like him is speaking up and saying like, "Hey, we need to have regulations," like then that's something like people should probably be listening to.
Well, and he currently is a resident of Spain and is very enmeshed in the soccer world. And I think that brings up something that I've been curious about for a while, which is that the United Kingdom has passed a law preventing front of shirt sponsors, or maybe the Premier League passed. I actually don't know where the initial thing. I know the UK did a study and that led to this ban, that soccer teams can't put Bet365 whatever on the front of their shirts. What's funny is there's been a huge influx of money to make as many of those sponsorship payouts as possible before 2026 when it goes into effect. So it's like, the market responding in predictable fashion there. But other countries who have had this stuff legalized for longer are seeing the repercussions much sooner. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. But the other question is just to make it back kind of to us. Do you think sports media has any role to play in how they are talking and covering this kind of thing, given how prevalent that it is now?
I mean, can they? Like, can
No, I
can
don't
the
know.
Dan Levitard show on the DraftKings network, or Up and Adams on FanDuel TV, or the Bill Simmons podcast on FanDuel TV, can, like, it's all intertwined now. I mean, that's like Bomani has been pretty outspoken. Bomani Jones has been pretty outspoken
Yep.
about gambling and its effects, and he also notes that Prize Picks, I think, is one of the sponsors of his show. ESPN has ESPN Bet. I think we might be wasting our breath, like asking what role sports media has to play in this, when sports media is inherently implicit in, at the very least, promoting it and taking taking the money from the sports gambling companies. So again, I don't think it's anything that should be outlawed. I think it's going to happen,
Yeah.
whether it's legalized or not. And so it probably makes more sense to legalize it and regulate it and tax it. But I also don't, I just think we're at this point now where it's so entwined with sports media. It's so intertwined with sports. I think we kind of just are where we are with it.
Yeah, I guess no, I don't think that there's necessarily anything that can be done. There's no putting the genie back in the bottle. I think that it's a little bit of like an invisible target that some of these broadcasts and shows are aiming at, where they've kind of decided that everything needs to have a little bit of a lean or a reference or an allusion to betting in some way, shape, or form, no matter how equipped the host might be to actually have that conversation and bring that analysis, or whether that topic is even relevant to the average sports bettor. I think that has gone a little bit too far, where you're watching
It definitely
some,
has.
yeah, you're watching some game break or something, and it's like, oh, and by the way, or like a good example of this, those cut-ins from Charles Barkley and Kenny Smith during NBA on TNT Thursdays, where they're just being idiots talking about bets over the top of the game in real time, and then they shoot a confetti cannon and then they go off. It's like, that's just so they can get a payday. No one wants that. Even the most avid bettor doesn't care about that at all. It's not
That
getting
will,
anybody.
so like I said, like I bet, and so I follow a decent amount of sports betting content, and what these networks are providing is like terrible sports betting content. It is not good. It's not good content. It's like I see Stephen A. Smith tweet out his prize picks for NBA and NFL games. If you are tailing Stephen A. Smith's bets just because he's Stephen A. Smith, like, you deserve to lose your money. Like,
Yeah.
like, what are you doing? Like, I listen to a lot of gambling podcasts. Shout out to my guy Anthony DeBundo at the Athletic, or not the Athletic, the Ringer. Yeah, I just screwed that up. I was going to clip this and send it to him, and now I can't. But
You still can. We
like,
got there.
he was at the Action Network beforehand, and like he would do these podcasts, and he does them now at the Ringer, where like he'll give you his picks, but he'll talk you through his picks. He'll give you his rationale. He's not even necessarily touting them so much as he's like just explaining his logic. Like, those are good back and forth conversations that I enjoy about sports betting, that allow you to like make up your own mind and just kind of view sports through a different prism. It's how I picked up following soccer, is just through the lens of sports betting and DFS. Like you said, Charles Barkley giving out his same game parlay on a random Thursday night, like, that is not good content. Like, these people who are not connected to the sports betting world, just giving you random picks and giving you random same game parlays. Like, I don't know who that appeals to. And for the love of God, if you are tailing those picks, like, trust me, there is a lot better things you could be doing with your money than doing that.
You don't deserve Congress to protect you if you're tailing Stephen A. Smith. You got to figure your own shit out for a little
There should
while.
be an exemption. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. One last part of this conversation. You mentioned Bomani Jones. I think he's a good example. He has been critical of this, and he notably on his own podcast lets his producer do his prize picks reads for the most part. And it is, it's insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but I think it's like a small way to basically kind of illustrate that he has to play by these rules, but doesn't love it. And Pablo Torre gave a quote along the same effect, along the same grounds to Jimmy Train on his podcast in March. And I just wanted to read it as another point of view. He says, I don't see gambling to be so special that it cannot fund journalism. He pointed in that conversation to things like drugs and alcohol, which maybe not so much drugs, but beer commercials are everywhere. There's plenty of vices or questionable investments that get to be commercials and ads in any kind of content. And he said, insofar as these companies with money realize that content can be more than just the barstoolization of everything, i.e., doing a show like Pablo's, which is a little bit more sophisticated and he's doing real reports. He said, I think we're better off if the stuff that gets funded is actually trying to be thoughtful, have reporting, employ people who speak honestly about the trade-offs and why they're comfortable with it. Now, that naturally begs the question, what if Pablo wanted to do a week's worth of shows about how immoral and corrupt sports betting is? How would that go? To my knowledge, he hasn't done stuff like that. I don't know if that's because he has a guiding hand or if that's just his choice and not where his brain has taken him in the production of his show. But these are things we always kind of have to wonder about. And you pointed out athletes along the same vein here. I will say, like, I bet too, it's legal in Arizona. I have no problem with it. I agree with your points that it should be legal, but it's a little bit crazy to me that the same people who will get, suspended off the face of the earth if they touch this stuff are making money from companies who advocate for it, making money off of people who bet on them indirectly. I guess you could look at that and say, why not? They should be able to get in on it, but feels like a little bit of speaking out of two sides of your mouth, if I'm being honest.
I think the athlete stuff is really interesting. And I think like that's going to become a big talking point, I think, in the next few years, especially with, is this what you're getting at? Like the idea of like LeBron James having an endorsement deal with DraftKings?
Yeah. Kevin Durant has an NFL only partnership with FanDuel.
Right. So I wrote this story on Awful Announcing about Nicholas Pettit-Freer, right tackle for the Tennessee Titans, who now is a fantasy analyst for Fantasy Life, Matthew Berry's website. And the reason why that's noteworthy is Nicholas Pettit-Freer was suspended last year for sports betting, not betting on the NFL, but betting on other sports while he was at the Titans facility. And now he is a fantasy analyst at a company that promotes gambling picks, or gambling is a part of what they offer in terms of their picks and analysis. And so everybody, jumps to the same conclusion, like, oh my God, I can't believe this guy who was suspended for gambling is now working for a company that profits off gambling. Like, this is clearly a conflict of interest for an NFL player. And I agree. I mean, I wrote up about it. I think it's a crazy thing. I think it's a bad perception issue for the NFL. And I was writing about it in terms of LeBron having a deal with DraftKings, Kevin Durant having a deal with FanDuel, and both those deals are quote unquote NFL only or whatever. They're promoting the NFL product. But what does that matter? Like that is kind of a difference, or a distinction without much of a difference. A part of LeBron, a very minimal part of LeBron James's income is now dependent on DraftKings, regardless of if it's NBA bets or NFL bets or EPL bets. Same with Kevin Durant and FanDuel. And so that to me is like this gray area where it's the difference between sports betting and alcohol and cigarettes is that these athletes have a direct impact on the business that they're promoting. Their play helps affect the bottom line of these sports books. And to me, that is just that's going to be a really messy area. And I'm really surprised we're still at the point where athletes are allowed to take these endorsement deals.
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily say that there's a specific case study where an athlete who has been very vocal against any of this, or the hate online and things that we've heard a lot of athletes talk about, then hypocritically jump to participating. But the fact remains that there are athletes who have expressed a real desire for their leagues or the companies or the team or somebody to help them from in-person heckling, online DMing and hate stuff that they get as a result. I mean, you see it, you just go through Twitter. If you look at 500 athletes a day, I'm sure 20 of them are talking about this. It's constant. I hate to it's not my world. I'm not part of it, but hey, LeBron's not doing you any favors. NBA player X who doesn't want some idiot fan DMing them, fuck you, you ruined my parlay. The best player in your league, this legendary guy, is telling everybody to go sign up. It's like, come on, how do you not get frustrated with that? Just all the conflictions that are happening with it right now.
I think it's just the new normal. I think that, football players have been dealing with this from a fantasy football aspect for more than 20 years now, probably. And this is just the next extension of it. I mean, that's the thing is, like, the NFL is never going to shut down fantasy football because fantasy football is very good for business. And with the way these sports betting operators are paying these leagues, it's going to be good for business, even if some feelings get hurt along the way, unfortunately.
Is it realistic to have a regulation where players can't be spokespeople for it? Is that just
I don't see why not.
ridiculous?
I don't see why not. I don't. I mean, I guess it's tough though because the leagues are partners with them too. So I guess if the leagues were to say we're not going to take their dollars anymore, the players aren't going to anymore. You could do that, but as long as the league is taking the money, man, I don't know. Like, that to me is like when you're speaking out of both sides of your mouth in terms of, like, especially when, LeBron James can say, you are using me to promote this. I'm gonna
exactly because they can use LeBron James footage in a commercial if they have a deal
right.
with the NBA. So then come on, let me in too.
Right. So the league's never going to do that. So this is just it's really shocking we haven't had like a major scandal in the last couple of years.
I thought we were getting it with Ohtani. We were there, and then somehow he ended up being completely proven and vindicated, which is obviously great for him and Major League Baseball. But maybe that reckoning does need to come at some point because I think you're going to need something like that to at least just figure out what we want this to look like, even if maybe there's no putting that genie back in the bottle. All right, time for our hot mic segment. Each of us give our favorite thing, most interesting thing of the week from the world of sports media. Ben, what do you got for us?
So I felt like the executives at ESPN must have been listening to last week's episode of the play-by-play because we talked about Jason Kelce's debut on Monday Night Countdown. And then lo and behold, my take at the time was that the platform was too small for him. Like, it felt like he needs to be doing more than just being on a Monday Night Football pregame show. And then lo and behold, he joins the Monday Night Football booth for the third quarter of the Monday night matchup between the Philadelphia Eagles and Atlanta Falcons. Now, a part of that might be because it was in Philadelphia and it was obviously a natural homecoming for Jason Kelce, but man, I thought he crushed it in the booth. It left me wanting more. It left me thinking about a potential 3-man booth with Joe Buck and Troy Aikman and Jason Kelce, which feels sacrilegious because Joe Buck and Troy Aikman are so synonymous as a 2-man booth. But man, I just think Jason Kelce's crushing it. I know some people were annoyed because it felt like a very Eagles focused broadcast, but I don't know. When I watch a national game, especially Monday Night Football, like, I like to get the feel of the city and I like to like get that atmosphere. And I felt like Jason Kelce really helped accomplish all of that for ESPN. Obviously, it would be annoying if you were a Falcons fan, but you could have just switched over to the Manning cast and watched Matt Ryan and you won. So who cares? But man, I just think Jason Kelce's killing it. And I really think my take, I'm going to stake out this mountain is I think he's going to be in a booth sooner rather than later on a full-time basis.
Don't tell Dan Orlovsky that he's that job is his in his mind, which is great. But I was surprised. One, yes, major college game day vibes on Monday Night Countdown. It was just like, we're here. We got one of your guys. It's a celebration of all things Philadelphia. This is, a football mecca. We're here. Let's do it. And it was cool. I appreciated it. And look, I mean, the Eagles have a bigger fan base. It was a home game for them. Like, sorry, Falcons fans. If the Cardinals were playing in that game, I would get it. I mean, it is what it is. The Eagles are what they are, and Kelce played for them. But I was surprised that Buck and Aikman were cool about it in a way. Weren't you? I mean, there's been so much kind of like read between the lines tension about them even like promoting the Manning cast. And I get that that involves turning the channel, which is partially how they're evaluated by their bosses is viewership and all those types of things, but I don't know. They've been a tandem that is inseparable, that has moved networks, that has fended off changes for my whole life basically. And now they're like, yeah, whatever. Week 2, come on in.
I think it was only one quarter. And I think if ESPN executives had their way, yeah, it would have been all 4 quarters. It was not the first or the fourth quarter where you probably have your highest audience. I do not think the placement of him. I mean, imagine if he was in the booth in the fourth quarter as that Eagles collapse was happening. It would have been incredible. But yeah, I mean, I don't expect him to be joining that booth as a third man anytime soon. But man, like, yeah, if you aren't going to promote Jason Kelce in Philadelphia, like, when are you going to promote Jason Kelce? So even Jason made a handful of jokes about ESPN getting their bang for their buck with him, no pun intended. And it certainly felt like they were trying to do that, getting him in that booth.
All right. My hot mic is the conversation around Tua Tagovailoa last week, which just because it was so huge in sports, becomes a sports media story. Everybody weighed in. It was nice to have voices like Nick Saban, I will say, out there. It made me appreciate him. And it's one of those weeks where it's actually really good to have some former coaches and athletes in there rather than just journalists kind of opining. Even like I listened to what Shannon Sharpe and Chad Johnson had to say, and just it's better that way. I know there was a lot of good stuff from the Sunday NFL Countdown. Is that what it's called? Sunday morning show on ESPN. So it was all good. I think it was. I'm not being critical of the conversation at all, and everybody kind of that's what you're there for, to weigh in on a huge moment like this. But this concussion conversation has been on the outskirts of football media, on the outskirts of sports journalism and investigations, and it's just been so prevalent since the beginning of the uncovering of the trauma that these players were dealing with a long time ago and the settlements and all this stuff. And it just felt a little bit like there was an overcorrection this time around. Given the history that everybody has with Tua in the recent past, he's not that old of a player, and we already have so many memories of him struggling with this. The viscerality, if that's a word, of like the fencing position and how scary and painful it looks to watch him go through that. National TV games multiple times where it's happened. But I still think it kind of condescended to Tua in a way that I wasn't super comfortable with in some instances. The general chatter veered a little too far in the direction of, we know all this stuff now about how much this is affecting you, so therefore here's like the ethical or moral decision you ought to make. And I think it just overlooks that, hey, the guys on the field have also been part of this conversation and this awareness for 10 years as well or more. I think Tua knows how serious it is. So let's just keep that in mind. I don't have like a profound thing of where it should go, but it felt uncomfortable to me.
My read on it was the first time Tua got the concussion on Thursday Night Football, which was in 2022, I believe. The reaction was very football based, a lot like the Damar Hamlin incident, where it was, look at what football is doing to these players, and look at the risks and the dangers associated with football, which are all valid conversations to have. I felt like this time around it was very Tua focused, and it was very like, hey, we've gone 2 years now without seeing this on the field, and every time it happens, it's you. You need to stop making us feel uncomfortable out there. You need to stop taking these hits. You need to do what's best for your family. And it
like be a good role model almost.
Right. It just took away the agency, or it just takes away the agency of 26, 27-year-old professional. Like granted, these have been horrendous concussions, especially when you bring up the fencing position. There are NFL players with a whole lot more than 3 diagnosed concussions over the course of 3 years. Even if I think there's one that everybody thinks was a concussion that wasn't diagnosed as one. Like Denzel Ward on the Cleveland Browns just had his 6th concussion in training camp.
Was it
And
Jordan Reed, the tight end? Wasn't
yeah,
that his name? Who every year would get knocked out for the season with this stuff.
yeah, and obviously they're not quarterbacks, and it's not happening on national television, and a lot of that goes into all of this. But it does feel like the conversation has shifted into what we're actually trying to say, or what people are actually trying to say is, Tua, stop making us feel this way. We don't like watching you.
Yeah, and we think that the right thing to do in accordance with the progress we've made on this topic would be for you to choose the path that is probably big picture the best one. You know what I mean? And one, like we have no way of really knowing if that's true or not, obviously. Two, I mean, I think the other part of it is you mentioned there's a lot of players who have gone through this in a more extenuating way that we don't to cover, but there's also players who have zero who deal with a lot of stuff later in life. It just felt like an overstepping of like almost a celebration of like we got this covered now. Like kind of almost sports media patting itself on the back in a way of like we know how to have these conversations now and we know this guy's history. So let's LFG, like you know what I mean? It was just weird.
Yeah.
It rubbed me the wrong way.
I did think, real quick, I thought Get Up did a nice job actually of covering it. They had one segment of the show where it was only ex-players. And so this is, 12 hours later on Friday morning. It was Ryan Clark, Bart Scott, and Chris Canty. And so they were all talking about their own experiences, not just with concussions, because that's what went viral, was Bart Scott saying that he retired because, he had effects of head trauma and he had never even been diagnosed with a concussion. But even the conversation about, hey, here's why it's not so easy to just retire at 27, because that's what everybody wants you to do. Like, this is your livelihood. This is all you know. This is your only shot at doing this. This is your identity wrapped in up in this. And obviously there were other ex-players saying that elsewhere, but I thought that the idea of having a players only conversation, which because of Ryan Clark's versatility, where he can be a host and an analyst, really in the same segment, I thought that was one of the better conversations I saw regarding Tua last week.
Yeah, I guess that is a great distinction that I should have made more clearly. I think the majority of the issue that I had was more of the reporter and analyst media types. I thought that, first of all, I'm not going to critique a player for talking about their own experience with this stuff ever, really, but I do think they were more nuanced most of the time that I saw them. I mentioned Sunday Countdown, I mentioned Nightcap. Those shows both I thought did a pretty good job of, hey, here's, maybe how he could adjust his style of play. Here's some of the things that we wish he might be doing. Here's what he might be weighing, all that stuff. But then you get into, the podcast hosts and the Mike Florios of the world and those types of people. And it just ends up being a little bit of disappointment, in my opinion. It sounds like Tua is going to the IR. We'll see. It doesn't sound like he has any plans of hanging up the cleats right now, at the very least, see how things progress. But the conversation will return whenever he does, I assume. That'll wrap us up, though. Thank you for listening to the Play-by-Play. We are here every week. Hit follow or subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform. If you have not already, don't forget to read the Awful Announcing website, where we put all of our great content up every single day. We have a newsletter and more where you can check out day-to-day, minute-to-minute coverage of this crazy world. And we'll see you next week.